Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Today, I'm going to be talking about an iOS checkup. Basically, the idea of this talk came from a talk I gave a little over 3 years ago in Toronto called Objective-C Vitamins. The idea of the talk then was to discuss things that the iOS community and iOS developers needed to do in order to make the community healthy, in order to maintain the community's health. The idea of, kids take vitamins to grow up to be big and strong. So what did the iOS developer community need in order to become big and strong? And at the time, I gave 3 main points. The first one, we needed to make our apps more accessible. The second, we needed to make our apps better well-tested, running more unit tests. And third, and finally, we needed to get better at managing our dependencies with open source software. And we've made progress on all of those fronts to varying degrees. And I thought it'd be really awesome to come back 3 years later and discuss, where are we now? What does our community look like? Where are we going? And to that end, today we're going to be talking about where we were in the past as iOS developers, where we are today, and where we're going tomorrow. And I think it's really important to discuss where we were and where we are, to sort of trace a line to detect where we're going, but also to have control over where we're going. It's not just a matter of predicting the future, it's a matter of influencing the future. So there are 3 really important things that I'd like you to keep in mind throughout this talk. The first one is going to be that empathy is essential. We'll be talking about what empathy is and why it's important. Second, we're going to be talking about mindfulness and how we should be mindful and thoughtful about how we build software. And third and finally, we're going to talk about community-driven development, which is a word that I made up, but it really fits the topic really well. So first, empathy. Empathy is the ability and practice of understanding and sharing someone else's feelings. It's the practice of considering someone else's perspective, thinking about their point of view, and sharing that point of view and sharing their feelings in order to understand what it's like to be them and be in their shoes. It's interesting because instead of talking about empathy for other people, I think first we need to talk about empathy for ourselves. It's not a topic that's limited to other people. I think we can think about how we apply empathy to ourselves, particularly when we look at the nature of time. There's past, present, and future, and we can think of ourselves as 3 different people: our past selves, our present selves, and our future selves. So let's look at empathy for ourselves in this context. All right, past, present, future. How do we think of ourselves when we look at ourselves in the past? Probably we think of ourselves as being not as smart. Maybe we dislike our former selves because of the mistakes that we made. We probably think we were morons, maybe. I apologize to new colleagues when they come on a team for code that I wrote a few years ago because I wouldn't want to deal with it, and now they have to. They're stuck dealing with my mistakes, and I feel bad about that. I think that's a common trait among developers, to be embarrassed by code we wrote in the past. As far as our present selves, we're fine. I mean, how we do things now is the way things ought to be done. We understand that we're getting better all the time, but generally we consider the decisions we make today to be good decisions. Generally, we consider how we work today to be the way people should work. And we consider whatever level of abstraction we think is correct to be the correct level of abstraction. So finally, there's the future. When we think of our future selves, we normally think that we will be smarter, more experienced, more capable. And we actually have empathy for our future selves. I'm sure many of you have written comments in your code to the effect of, "I'm really sorry." Dear future self, I am so sorry. This is the code I had to write to get the project done on time. I have a deadline. I don't have time to do it properly. I'm sorry. You're going to have to deal with this later, but right now it's the right decision. And I think that's interesting because when we think of ourselves in the future, we empathize with that person. We can see them and we can share their pain. share their feelings of having to deal with not so great code. But when we think of our past selves, that's not something that we empathize with. That's not a person we empathize with. We only see our past selves as someone who made mistakes, as someone who didn't do what we would have done now. But remember, we did our best. You know, the past self that you have, they're someone who did the best they could in the circumstances. They programmed to the best of their ability. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that it's okay, that we make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Now that we have empathy for ourselves, we can talk about empathy for each other. I would argue that having empathy for ourselves and understanding our own feelings is necessary in order to understand the feelings of others, in order to appreciate their perspective. And it's really important, I think, in the community to acknowledge that everyone has similar fears, everyone has similar doubts, everyone struggles day to day to learn. They struggle to complete tasks, to work on tight deadlines, or work with technology they don't understand yet. We all struggle, because no one is born knowing how to program, especially not programming on iOS. We struggle every day, and recognizing that other people have similar struggles to us can help us in really tangible ways. And I'm not just making things up. We have scienced empathy, and the results are awesome. Recently, there was a study released done on 8th grade students in the Bronx in New York City. They divided the students into basically two groups. One group of students was told information about the lives and the struggles of three of history's greatest scientists, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, and Michael Faraday. They were given information about how these people had to struggle against depression, struggle against a society that didn't recognize the contributions that women could make or the contributions that people from lower classes could make. And they were shown that these people had to struggle, and that's okay, because they accomplished great things despite their struggles. The other group of students was only told about these people's accomplishments: general relativity, radioactivity, electromagnetism, three of the most important discoveries in modern times. And the results from this study analyzed the grades of the students in their science classes before and after they were given these different pieces of information. And what they found was really fascinating. The students who learned about the struggles of these scientists, their grades went up. And what's really interesting is that not only did their grades go up, but the students who were the lowest performers before, they benefited the most. The people who needed the most help got the most help just by learning that these scientists who accomplished amazing things had difficult lives and faced challenges when they were accomplishing these things. But what's really startling, I think, is that the students who didn't learn about the struggles, who weren't able to empathize with these scientists, and who only learned that they did amazing things, their grades went down. So we can see that empathy helps test scores. It encourages students to study science. It gives them motivation because they can see themselves in scientists. And we see that people who need the most help are the most benefited from a little bit of empathy. And finally, not only do we see that empathy is beneficial, but a lack of empathy is actually harmful. 3 years ago, I first started writing about my depression on my blog, and I said, I wish that I had something more substantial to add to the discussion than me too. But sometimes it's worth knowing that you're not alone and that it can get better. And people have written to me since I wrote this and thanked me for writing this because they thought they were alone, and they know that they're not now. And that's been really helpful to them. But hearing from them and having them contact me has been really helpful to me, because sometimes I forget that I'm not alone, and I forget that things do get better. Empathizing with each other has helped us both. This is a form of communication. Communication is one of the best ways that we can put empathy to use in our day-to-day lives, and communication is basically how we use empathy. This ties back to programming in a very concrete way. The introduction to one of the most important books on computer programming, The Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, the introduction contains this: programs must be written for people to read and only incidentally for machines to execute. Programs are written for people to read. That means that programming is a form of interpersonal communication. You are expressing an idea in code for someone else, maybe your future self or a colleague, to understand. And programming is therefore a social activity, which isn't intuitive when we think about the stereotypes that society has about programmers, that we're lonely, that we're in our basements programming because we don't have any friends, when in fact the act of programming is a social activity. So based on the structure and interpretation of computer programming, we see that a good programmer is necessarily a good communicator. I would argue that this relationship is bidirectional. If we become better at communication, then we can actually become better at programming, because programming is communication. This strikes some people as a little strange, because if we look at some of the more famous programmers, they don't fit the definition of good programmer. If we look at Linus Torvalds, for example, he wouldn't be qualified as a good programmer. Effective? Yes. Accomplished? Yes. Good? No. That's okay. Good communicators are good programmers, and vice versa. So, communication is important. Communication is critical. We rely on it in order to express ourselves in code, and we rely on it to solve problems that are bigger than a single individual can solve. We rely on it to collaborate with other developers, to make solutions to problems that are too difficult for one person to solve. Kinder communication through empathy has been demonstrated in studies of the open source community to increase the amount of new contributors to an open source project. Kinder communication increases the duration of a contributor's stay within a community and a project. And kinder communication decreases the amount of time between when a bug is reported and when the bug is fixed. These are concrete, tangible benefits to having empathy for each other and for ourselves. The problem is that when we code, we're expressing ideas in text, and most of our issue trackers are also written in text. And that's a problem, because text-based communication is very, very bad at conveying empathy. This isn't really surprising to me. When we look at throughout human history, we see the vast majority of humanity, we've been communicating only face-to-face. We've been able to hear each other's voices. We've been able to see each other's faces, and we naturally emote with them. We empathize with the person we're talking to. When we invented written communication, things went poorly for empathy. The problem is there's no such thing as neutrality in written communication. Your words are going to be interpreted as either being positive or negative, not really in between. There's no such thing as neutral on the internet. To solve this problem, I've started moving to Google Hangouts early and often, or Skype call, whatever you want. Basically, instead of discussing things over GitHub or whatever your issue tracker is, I try to move them to a face-to-face conversation with someone early, and I do that often. In a project that I work on, someone was opening issues, real problems, but they were very angry, and they came across as very rude. So I opened, I commented and said, let's have a hangout, and I chatted with them in person, and it wasn't so much that they were angry or rude, it's that they lacked the English skills and the experience to be able to express their idea without coming across as being angry. Next time they open an issue, I just told them, I said, hey, I don't know if you know, but this comes across as rude. Do you mind rephrasing it? They said, oh yeah, no problem. and everything was fine. And it's really important that I ask them to rephrase that, because that keeps the bar for our community very high. And it says the language that we accept is only positive, that it's not this level of rudeness, even if it's accidental. It's not something that we accept in the community. We see a clear progression from empathy for ourselves to empathy for each other. It improves our programming skills, it improves our communication skills, it improves the health of our communities, it improves our ability to learn. Communication is only one way that we can use empathy, but how else can we put it to work? And the answer to that is to be mindful. I don't mean mindfulness necessarily in the Zen sense, but not necessarily not in the Zen sense either. I really just mean that we need to be thoughtful about how we work. There's an expression, I'm sure many of you have heard it, don't reinvent the wheel. Has anyone heard that before? Yeah. Well, my friend tweeted this picture the other day, and they said it's a good thing that some people were actually willing to reinvent the wheel. Because if we had cars, if we had Flintstone cars with stone wheels, I don't know if we'd have cars at all. We had a stone wheel. We invented a thing that was round and could move something across the ground. And that was significant, but we didn't stop there. We said, what if we made it out of wood, which is easier to turn into a wheel, which is lighter? Awesome. And then we said, well, why do we need it to be all made of wood? Let's invent spokes, and let's have a wooden wheel that's even lighter. Later on, when we invented rubber, we were able to create a tire outside of our wheel that could absorb some of the shock. And now we have tires that are actually filled with compressed air, which is a far cry from the stone wheel that we originally invented. If humans hadn't been willing, if they hadn't been thoughtful about the way they solve problems, we wouldn't have invented the wheels we know today. We'd still be rolling around on rocks. The key here is that we've looked for better ways to solve familiar problems. We looked at the solutions we have in order to solve problems, and we said, there's got to be a better way. And we invented. We came up with something new. And I think that in the iOS developer community, this has become more of a habit for us since Swift was released. Because when we had a brand new programming language and we had brand new tools to solve our problems, we thought, I wonder if I can solve UI table view data source in a better way. We looked at common problems throughout writing iOS applications and thought, maybe we can use this new tool to write better programs. JP Simard from Realm gave really convincing talks at AltConf and UIConf, where he gave a compelling argument that we don't have to wait for Apple to improve our tools for us. We don't have to wait for Apple to make our lives better. We can do it ourselves, and in fact, we should do it ourselves, because we have the ability to improve our tools. Why wouldn't we reinvent the wheel? And to our credit, we've done this a lot. The iOS developer community has created multiple dependency managers to make it easier to introduce open source technology, open source software into our applications and rely on each other for help. We've built Fastlane, a tool to automate things that are tedious. Writing unit tests, compiling our application, dealing with provisioning profiles, deploying to the App Store. These are all things that I rely on Fastlane to do because they're really boring. We've created Jazzy, a documentation generator for Swift. Apple didn't come out and say, here's a documentation generator. That's something that we built. We have nsdateformatter.com, which I use constantly in order to make sure that the NSDateFormatter format string I'm producing actually works. We've made quick and nimble because the unit testing framework that Xcode ships with is not sufficient to write good tests. We need something better. We've made the inclusive toolkit from Sally Shepard in order to make our applications more accessible, to make it easier for developers to make our iOS and OS X applications accessible to people who might be visually impaired or otherwise need accessibility help. These are all things that we've done outside of Apple. We didn't wait for Apple to do this for us. We did it ourselves. And this is just a quick list that I made off the top of my head. There are many more examples of how we've taken the existing tools that we have and we've made them better, or we've invented new ones altogether. Beyond being thoughtful about the tools we use to solve problems, I think it's important to be thoughtful about how we communicate. And yes, I know we talked about communication before, but I'm going to talk about it again because I think it's really important. Mindful communication requires thoughtfulness about our tone and about our language. Remember, I said there's no such thing as neutral on the internet. Your words are either interpreted to be positive or negative, and you should control how your words are going to be interpreted. I would encourage you all to be extra positive to avoid being interpreted as being a negative person. And how do we do that? How do we become extra positive? Well, the first thing you should do is use lots of exclamation points, like a ton of them. If you're thanking someone for submitting a pull request, really thank them. If you're grateful for someone's help on an issue, thank them with an exclamation point. Avoid sarcasm at all costs. Sarcasm does not translate into text at all, and you should never use sarcasm on a GitHub issue. If you're critiquing a pull request, make sure to critique the code and not the coder, because it's the code that is in the project, but it's the coder who's going to come back and submit more pull requests. And always express gratitude a lot, because people love knowing that their work is beneficial and that it's appreciated. Being positive when you communicate is a lot easier when you think ahead. When I'm replying to a GitHub issue and I see that I'm writing something that is rude or negative, I kind of think, why am I like this? Why am I writing in this really mean way? And it's usually because I'm in a bad mood. It's really hard to be positive when you're feeling bad yourself. So for common responses that I have to provide for open source projects I maintain, I actually write them up beforehand so that I just need to copy and paste them into GitHub. I don't do the work at the time because I can't trust myself to be positive all the time. I originally planned on talking about this before GitHub made this a feature of GitHub, so it's even easier to do now, and you really don't have any excuse. There's another tool that you can use to be extra positive. It's something I borrowed from the National Conference for Community Justice. It's an acronym called LARA. It's a way for you to, to respond to comments on the internet, and specifically here on GitHub and other issue trackers, to respond to rude comments or negative comments in a way that changes the discussion for the better. Listen, reread the post, and pretend that the best person in the world wrote it. Give them the benefit of the doubt and assume the best of intentions. Affirm. Find something, anything in what they wrote that you can agree with. It can be as simple as acknowledging that the issue that they reported does exist. You'd be surprised how far you can go with that. Respond to them. Set the tone of the conversation. Start with your affirmation. Let them know that you understand the thing you agree on, and add facts. Add statistics, counterexamples, possible workarounds, other solutions, but keep the dialogue civil. Make sure that you're being kind and you're giving them that benefit of the doubt. So communication, great. What else is there to be thoughtful about? Automation. When we think about automation, we either think of automatic car assembly or maybe automatic deployments of our code through Fastlane or something. And those are all true and great. But there are other ways that we can automate. There are other really easy wins for us to make. This is a Slack conversation from a few months ago. Once again, I asked my colleagues, Ora and Aloy, I'm having trouble with pod install. I'm seeing a weird failure. Are you seeing this? And as usual, Orta pointed out, are you using bundle exec? It's really important because we're usually using the beta version of CocoaPods to test it out on artsy applications. And I was not, as usual. And I said, yeah, thank you. And he kind of joked that it's almost time for a bot. And in my defense, I said I hadn't had any coffee yet, so that's not really my fault. But I really liked his idea of creating a bot. So I did. I created an automated Slack response that would listen for pod install and correct me to bundle exec pod install. And it's happened since that I said, hey, pod install is not working, and Slack has reminded me that I need to type bundle exec, and it's helped. It's prevented me from bothering them with the problem that I can't remember how to fix myself. And other colleagues have benefited from this too. When we've had trouble with pod install, they've been able to type it into Slack, get reminded, they try that, and it works. I automated this work so that I wouldn't have to bother my colleagues anymore, and we all benefited. So I think that we should look for other opportunities to automate things. Automation isn't just something that we do to deploy code. Automation is a mindset that we can think, if I do something more than once, is there a way to automate it? Should I make this automatic? Let's look at an example. Let's say I write some unit tests. They are awesome unit tests, because I listen to John Reed, and I write awesome unit tests. But I want to make sure that those unit tests are run whenever I change my code. I want my unit tests to be run when I open a pull request. I want this to be done automatically, so I set up continuous integration with Travis or Circle CI or whatever. Now, whenever I open a pull request, a computer somewhere is going to run my unit tests for me automatically. Now that I've automated CI for unit testing, now I can use CI to automate code coverage analysis. And I can make sure that code coverage of our unit tests goes up or stays above a certain threshold. I can automate deploys with Fastlane. So if I push to a certain branch, then Fastlane will run my unit test, or CI will run my unit tests, and Fastlane will, if it succeeds, push a build to test flight or hockey or wherever. I can use CI to automate common pull request responses. That's a little weird, right? Like, what does that mean? Well, I want to tell you about a tool that my colleague Orta wrote called Danger. Danger automates the culture of your project, because instead of having to respond to every pull request and notice common things that need to be fixed, a computer will do it for you as part of your continuous integration. Danger is able to detect the metadata of your pull request on continuous integration and check that certain things are true. For example, we have ArtsyBot, or Artsy Mobile, that checks if more than 50 lines of code have changed, but the changelog file isn't included in the changed files of the pull request, then it fails the build. It says you need to add a changelog entry. If a specific file in our project that we often modify locally but shouldn't be checked in, if we accidentally check that in, it'll fail the build. It'll check to make sure that we haven't checked in a developer's specific file. If we include WIP at the beginning of our pull request, then Danger warns us that it's work in progress. It says you should probably hold off on merging this, because even if the CI is green and the unit test pass, the person who opened the pull request has indicated that it's not ready to be merged yet. And this one I like a lot because I always forget to do it. If we don't include an iPhone emoji in the title of our pull request, then it warns us that we need to test on a physical device because we can't rely on the simulator. This saves our team a lot of time. And since it's a bot, I never feel bad about being told that I forgot to add a changelog entry. And I never feel bad about having to tell anyone that they forgot a changelog entry, because I never have to anymore. We're using this on our iOS projects at Artsy, and we're using this on our web projects. CocoaPods has recently adopted it. I think you should all check it out. Another thing I want to automate through continuous integration is team management. On Moya, which is a project that I help run, we have a policy that anyone who gets a merged pull request, their first time, whether it's a typo fix, a documentation edition, or a bug fix, or feature edition, anything. If they get a merged pull request on Moya, they get invited to be a member of our team, and they get push access to our repository so that they can help triage issues and they can help merge pull requests. This increases the ownership that they feel over the project, and it means less work for me because now I have more people helping me. Our next step is to automate this with a tool called Squad Goals that is actually built to integrate with GitHub API and continuous integration that checks. We're going to write this code, this little snippet that says, if this person has submitted their first pull request, it's been merged, invite them to the organization and comment on the pull request saying, thank you for your addition. We really appreciate it. We've invited you to become a member of the Moya organization. Here is a link to our contributing guidelines. If you have any questions, just let us know. That's something I want to do because keeping track of all the different pull requests that get merged on Moya is, it's not a lot of work, but it's constant work that I need to do, and it's kind of tedious. I'd rather not do it. So we have empathy and we have mindfulness. If we add the internet, what do we get? Community-driven development. Again, this is a phrase I made up because it sounded cool, but I think it's a good one. Basically, what I mean about community-driven development is that we should develop software as though we are a member of a community, even if that software is closed source. And there are a few different ways to approach this idea. Let's talk about them. First, sharing an idea is the easiest way to validate that that idea is good. I had the idea to use Swift enums to structure networking code in a type-safe way so that the compiler would guarantee that I was only calling network endpoints that I had predefined up front were valid. I thought this was kind of cool, so I created a library called Moya to do it for me and open sourced it. Other people started using it. This was while Swift was still in beta. Other people started using that, and that really validated my idea. It told me that this is something worth pursuing. I checked yesterday, and Moya has been installed through CocoaPods on over 1,700 different applications from around the world, which is pretty good validation that this is a good idea. But not only does opening up an idea and sharing the idea validate it, it can help you improve it. Sharing an idea is actually the easiest way to improve it because it opens it up to critique. And critique is how we get better code. In fact, with Moya, lots of people had suggestions on how to make it even better. As of yesterday, the master branch has 901 commits from 71 different developers spanning 50 releases. Moya has become something more than I thought it would be. It's more than I ever thought it could be because other people had suggestions and they brought those suggestions to me and Moya. And I've been able to benefit from those suggestions because I get to use their code. And that's just fantastic. Looking back at my Objective-C Vitamins talk from 2013, I wasn't able to make assumptions like people agreed that open source was cool. I couldn't even... I had to explain what dependency management was and why it was a good idea and why using open source at all was beneficial. Today, I can assume that you've all heard of CocoaPods, and I can assume that most of you have probably tried it. That's a lot of progress that we've made in 3 years. The iOS community has become more community-focused. In 2013, I had to stress that open source was a good idea, but now I don't have to. That's progress. Let's look at an imaginary line. If we see on the left, iOS circa 2013, this is the amount of community-based open source software that an average developer uses. So we've got iOS circa 2013. It's pretty low. And let's on the right-hand side, extreme right, we've got the JavaScript community today. Maybe they're a little too community focused. Maybe they rely on open source software a little too much. If we look at where we are today, we've moved away from the low end towards the high end, but we're nowhere as near as almost ridiculously community oriented as the JavaScript community. In fact, I would say we still have a ways to go before we find a happy middle ground between where we are and where other colleagues of ours in the JavaScript community are. We've got a long ways to go before we reach the point of diminishing returns when using more community-oriented software techniques produces fewer improvements and even introduces risks into how we write software. We've got a long ways to go before we get there, and we should continue to improve and continue to become more community-focused. We're not going to run into a left pad-like situation on iOS anytime soon, and I think it's worth being cautious about, but it's worth remembering that we're nowhere near that. The benefits of community-driven development extend beyond code. It extends beyond products and into our professional development as people. There's a common piece of wisdom that says, if you're the smartest person in the room, find a new room. I really like this. I've tried to practice this throughout my career because I love learning from people who are smarter than me. I love working with people who are smarter than me because I get to learn from their experience. The idea that you surround yourself with smarter people, awesome. This is really easy in open source, not only because we operate on the internet and we don't have to worry about being in a physical room, but also because we exist in several rooms at once. We're not just iOS developers, we're also OS X users, we're also people who might use Homebrew, which is related to OS X, but not iOS specifically. I'm a member of the iOS community, but I'm also a member of the Ruby community, but not the Rails community, because I only work on Ruby tools like CocoaPods or Middleman, which I'm also a member of, and that sort of overlaps with the Jekyll and Octopress static site generator community. Now, in some of these rooms, I'm pretty smart. In most of these rooms, I'm not smart at all. And I love being surrounded by different people who have different levels of experience because I can benefit from listening to them and their suggestions by asking them questions. Being in open source means that I get to be the dumbest person in several rooms at once, which is awesome. Finally, I need to mention an idea called open source by default. You can take community-driven development to an extreme, and you can say everything has to be open sourced. This is the promise of the GNU people. I think that's not the answer. I think that as an industry, a better solution would be to look at how we build software. Typically, when a company builds software, it's closed source unless it has a reason to open it, a really good reason. And I think we should flip that on its head. I think that by default, all the software we write should be open unless there's a reason to keep it secret. There are lots of reasons to keep software closed, definitely lots of reasons, and there's lots of software that should be closed source. But by default, I think we should consider opening software and only close it if there's a compelling reason to. I can't get into this in too much more detail, but if you're interested in this, and I hope you are, I would encourage you to come to a panel discussion tomorrow afternoon that I'm participating in. I'd love to hear your questions as well about that later. So let's recap. We had 3 really important things I wanted you to keep in mind throughout this talk. The first thing is that empathy is essential. It's important for our own mental health, it's important for our professional development, and it's important for our progression as coders to become better professionals. Second, I encourage us to all be mindful about how we solve problems and thoughtful about the tools that we use to solve those problems. And third, I introduced the idea of community-driven development, hopefully convinced you that there are benefits to operating within the community as a whole instead of seeing yourself as an individual. In 1969, Buckminster Fuller wrote a book titled Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. The book was a series of things that humanity needed to do if it were to survive into the 21st century. He ended the book, planners, architects, and engineers, take the initiative, go to work, cooperate, and don't hold back on one another or try to gain at the expense of one another. Any success in such lopsidedness will be increasingly short-lived. Thank you very much.
Great talk! Exclamation mark.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. The first question is mine. So you mentioned a lot of tools to automate the developments. Which one is the best one, in your opinion?
The best or my favorite?
Your favorite, the most used one.
Fastlane, definitely Fastlane.
Fastlane.
Oh my goodness,
Okay.
it just Fastlane solves so many different problems. It's actually a suite of different tools. Psi is probably my favorite one because it means I don't have to deal with provisioning profiles anymore. We've automated the deploy of our applications at Artsy, so I no longer have to be signed in to our developer account on Xcode. I can be signed into my personal one, but not the main one that controls all the certificates. That reduces the risk that someone accidentally revokes all of our certificates through a fix issue button. In every way, it's changed how we build software in a very positive way.
Do you get this question often, a lot on the internet?
No, but people, like, I encourage people to use Fastlane a lot.
Okay.
There may be a little bit of, it's Ruby, so that scares away some iOS developers who might not have used Ruby before, but I promise you, if you put in a few hours of learning the tool and getting to know it, it will save you so much time.
I thought that might be a good use case to create bots for responding to questions.
Definitely.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for?
Thank you very much. Oh, thanks.
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Hello.
I got a question because on the first part of your presentation, you talk a lot of about communication and empathy between face-to-face, this Hangout and Skype, yeah. And then you talk that you wrote or you are using several things to automate responding to people. So that's kind of opposite for me. That I'm graduated by bot, or bot told me something instead of this face-to-face communication.
That's true. It is a sort of contradiction when I'm trying to encourage us to communicate face-to-face more, while also encouraging us to have pre-written responses to people. I'm really encouraging you to have pre-written responses to save yourself time and save yourself with the emotional energy of having to write the same thing over and over again, because that gets very tedious and it can lead you to burnout and negative feelings. I think there's a balance to be struck between encouraging face-to-face conversation and the efficiency that text brings us. I'm not saying that text-based communication is bad. I'm only saying it's bad at conveying empathy. If there's a situation that doesn't require a lot of empathy, then maybe it makes sense to use text-based communication. Does that answer your question? It's about, everything is balance, everything. Yeah.
Hi, Ash. Thank you very much. I've got just a couple of points, really. The first one is the interesting one in that an awful lot of our colleagues around here will be somewhere on the spectrum, shall we say, and empathy is not the easiest thing to come around. So that is an interesting thing, and empathy both for ourselves and certainly for others. And as you said, that is a very important thing. The other thing which I wanted to say is I have two lives, one of which is development. The other one is somewhat different. It's coaching people in things. And we have a saying that words have power, and that just kind of, I suppose, supports your point that we have to be very, very careful with our language as to the meaning and making sure that it is correct and that it conveys the right ideas. The last point is maybe on the slightly negative side of open sourcing things, and that is that within certain areas of our development, let's say areas of cryptography and security, we have to be significantly mindful of the fact that not all of the actors around us are on our side. Just as a kind of comment, really, that's all.
Sure. So to address your second point, I agree, words have power. They do. I also learned growing up that actions speak louder than words. And I think it's important to remember how we act in the community is as important as what we say. As for cryptography and the risks of open software, they exist, and I'm not saying that all software should be open source. What I'm really encouraging us to do is to think differently about how we develop code and software. Instead of considering it closed source unless we have a reason to open it, really just think about it in the inverse instead. If it makes sense to keep it closed, keep it closed.
Thank you for your talk. I enjoyed it very, very much.
Thank you.
And I was wondering if you would like to share us your opinion on communication through, let's say, Skype, which is also kind of face-to-face, and real-world communication, like when we are sitting in front of each other. Maybe considering these kind of things, like bosses often, in my experience, tend to not want to let you do maybe as much home office as you would like to do, because they have the opinion, you should sit near your colleague.
Right. Yeah, bosses. Our friend earlier described things as a trade-off, and I think that's true in a lot of every situation, really. Between meeting someone in a cafe and having a coffee with them and discussing a problem that we're having, obviously I would prefer that to Skype. But when I'm talking to someone in Japan, I can't do that. I could book a flight to Japan, I could meet them in a cafe, and I could talk about things. But the trade-off isn't worth it. And I think that in terms of what we can do, like if a contributor I need to discuss is in New York, I'll meet with them in person. But if they're not, which is often the case, then I need to find a different solution. And the trade-off of Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever makes it worth it. I prefer Google Hangouts actually because it's really easy to make it public and multi-person. And if you'd like, which is something you should discuss beforehand, you can actually record it for later and reference it if someone else wants to come by later and see what's happened. In the cases where I've used Google Hangouts in order to talk to someone, even if I don't record it, I always type up a summary of our conversation afterwards and post it to the GitHub issue so that if anyone else comes along later, they can see the gist of what we're discussing and understand why a certain decision was made. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a small gift for you.
Thank you.
This is for your work here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It was my pleasure to hosting you here. Thank you very much.